Mark Cannizzaro, our New York Post sports columnist, is out there in Arizona, and Super Bowl 57 is going to take place this Sunday between the Eagles and Chiefs. Mark, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's been a fun week out here so far, and obviously what we're all looking forward to is Sunday. So, it's there's a lot of hype always in Super Bowl weeks. Um, the player availability, the coach availability, it's kind of fun to get, around that. That's the kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are those days to do that. And then once Thursday is done, it's kind of, there's no access to anybody until game day. So everybody's obviously anticipating the game, and it should be a really, to me, it's a very much of a coin toss, 50-50 matchup for a lot of reasons.
The biggest thing I got to ask you, everyone's going to always overlook, this matchup against this matchup, but I want to ask you, what is your matchup that you are looking forward to this Sunday? What's that key matchup that you're looking forward to the most?
To me, I think this entire result boils down to whether the Eagles pass rush can get to Mahomes. I mean, obviously, they led the league in sacks this year. I can't remember what the number is, but they need only a handful of sacks to surpass the 85 Bears, which has always been known as the greatest defense ever in most sacks for postseason and regular season total. If the Kansas City offensive line can somehow stave off that pass rush, and the assumption is Mahomes' right ankle is certainly going to be better than it was 2 weeks ago in the AFC Championship game, but it still might be a little compromised. I mean, I'm sure it's not 100%. So I think that, to me, that is the key. I think up front, that Philly pass rush and whether it can get to Mahomes or not. If those guys don't get to Mahomes, I think that's going to be a problem for the Eagles, obviously.
You've wrote a couple of columns this week about how the Andy Reid, Nick Sirianni connection Nick Sirianni was on Andy Reid's staff previously. What more can you tell us about that relationship and how that's been over the years with those two?
Well, it's kind of a cool dynamic. So what happened was, Sirianni was not retained when Reid came to Kansas City, because Reid he had a receivers coach, a longtime guy that had been with him, and he immediately called Sirianni and a couple of other assistants who he didn't retain in Kansas City, and let them know quickly, because in that world, the faster these guys are out on the street, the better they have a chance to get another job. So Sirianni always appreciated that about Reid and about being up front, because some of these coaches might hold on to these guys for a while or whatever, and there's that happens all the time. And Sirianni didn't really, he didn't have a chance to really pick Reid's brain, so to speak, because they didn't really work together. So just a lot of respect for him, and that was 2014, and Sirianni went on to toil as an assistant for a number of years until he got the job last year in Philadelphia. So that's paying some pretty good dues. And it's funny. I love, and I talked to a bunch of the Eagles players about it a couple of weeks ago prior to coming out here, about that. I mean, the Sirianni introductory press conference was spectacularly disastrous, and the beauty of it was, as I came to find out and talking to some of the players, because I asked a bunch of the players, like, when you saw that press conference, what is your reaction about this dude that's about to come in and coach you guys, And what I hadn't realized and learned from speaking to them was, as soon as he was done with that press conference, or shortly thereafter, he had a team meeting for the first time with the players and ripped himself for his performance in the press conference to his players, and totally owned it and was pissed off about it, to use the words of a couple of the guys I spoke to, which I think really won the room a little bit, because anybody that watched that press conference, especially Philadelphia, is not an easy town, to be a professional athlete or a coach in. It's a very demanding place, like we are in the New York market. And, the way he kind of stammered and he mentioned something about flowers and growing flowers, and it was a weird analogy. None of it worked, obviously. And I think the way he, really kind of humbly and self-effacingly, ripped himself in front of the players for that, really won them over, a lot. And, he's a smart guy. He's a young guy, super energetic. I don't profess to know him at all. I've just seen him in press conference settings, but I like what I see about him. He just has an energy about him and a little bit of a cockiness about him now. They've had some success and he gets after it pretty well. But yeah, it's two very contrasting styles when you look at Reid, who's very stoic, on the sideline, and even he's not he'll have his fun. He's a fun guy to speak to, and a very personable guy, but he's just completely different than Sirianni. Sirianni's a little goofy, and there's an endearing quality there. So it is a fun coaching matchup. It really is.
It is. And it's amazing how we've seen that evolution of Nick Sirianni from that opening press conference to now he is taking his team to the Super Bowl. And, I think a lot of people were interested to see, because you saw the Eagles get beaten pretty bad by the Buccaneers last year in the playoffs. You wanted to see how this team was going to develop. And to Nick Sirianni's credit, he developed Jalen Hurts into arguably the MVP until he got hurt. I mean, Patrick Mahomes obviously won it last night at the NFL Honors Award. But what can you say about Nick Sirianni in this turnaround? Some of the things that you reported as well this week was that core four from the old Eagles team that won the Super Bowl a couple of years back.
Well, it's interesting. He's the first one to admit that, most of the time when head coaches come into new situations, they're coming into a really bad team, right? The Eagles were not a terrible team when he got there. I mean, this is a team that was not far removed from the Super Bowl. And as you just referred to, that core four, which I did write about, Kelsey and Lane Johnson and Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, he stepped right into a spot where he had two anchors on the offensive line in Kelsey and Johnson, and two of the most important players on defense, on their front seven, in Graham and Cox. And, that's, and Sirianni's admitted it. He's like, look, most people don't walk into a job and have those kind of established players there. Coaches are hired, because the guy previous to them were fired because the team stunk or was in turmoil or disarray or whatever. So, Sirianni is very lucky in that way to have that veteran leadership, and he's leaned on it. He's smartly leaned on it and embraced it, and so that's helped him out a lot. But those four are not going to help you, or they're no guarantee to get you to the playoffs in your first year as a head coach, which he did last year. Granted, they did lose in the playoffs, but these are the steps teams make. And they may, listen, I mean, Howie Roseman, and their management, they've brought the right people in. Same with Kansas City. I mean, it's all about, I was at the Kansas City availability yesterday, and I was talking to Jarek McKinnon, one of their running back, who's a very personable guy. And he just talked about how this, the team's different than it was last year, jumping to Kansas City. Every team that is successful and gets to these levels, there's a chemistry, there, and the guys in roles, and they're content in those roles, and they're not, there's not an ego thing, and the Eagles have that, and they've blended some young guys in there, obviously the receiving core, and the new guys, and the same thing with Kansas City. I mean, they brought. My column in today's paper was about these guys from that they brought in at receiver, all free agents, Juju Smith-Schuster and Valdez-Scantling and even Watson from Tampa Bay, all came from Hall of Fame quarterbacks, right? And they just fit. They fit right away, right? And the same thing's happening now with the Eagles. So there's a common denominator, all these teams that are successful, and it's the chemistry. Listen, you have to have talent, of course,
right?
But it's the chemistry. And in the case, circling back, and I know I went roundabout, and I'm sorry for our viewers, but rounding it, bring it back, to the Eagles and that core four. Those guys are a massive part of that chemistry that the Eagles have with the newcomers in there, and with Jalen Hurts, just growing a little bit more. I mean. He's had the talent, but it was just about getting confident, and he is also a guy that, and again, speaking to a number of guys in the Eagles locker room, he's a guy that just had that kind of that intangible leadership quality about him the
Mhm.
moment he walked in the door, even if his performance initially wasn't, commensurate with where his leadership quality was and that those traits he had. Now it's all blending in together perfectly. And what you have is a guy, as you mentioned before, who was an MVP candidate until he got hurt.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how the Eagles, they have, like you said, they have that core four, that leadership, and they've blended a lot of new players into their roster. I think a lot of people are discussing, the matchup this week. One thing to keep bringing up is that the Eagles defense hasn't been tested this entire playoffs like they're going to be tested here in the Super Bowl because they are facing the MVP. They're facing the best quarterback in the NFL, and Patrick Mahomes. How do you see that matchup playing out? Obviously, you talked about the pass rush being your key matchup you're going to watch, but you talk about the new wide receivers that the Chiefs brought in. Patrick Mahomes, when you talk about him, and obviously is the best quarterback, like what do you see out of him? Like this matchup of him facing that Eagles secondary and all of the weapons that they have in Travis Kelce and Jerick McKinnon and those guys, how do you see that playing out?
Well, you're right, and that's something I am concerned. Concerned is not the right word, but I'm very curious to see because the Eagles have not been the same dominant team they were prior to Jalen, hurting his shoulder. And as you said, in the playoffs, they beat a giant team in the divisional round that they've owned for the last 7 or 8 or 9 games. I mean, they swept them in 3 games this year. And then they play a 49er team that loses its quarterback. Oh, by the way, its third string quarterback, technically speaking, in the first quarter of that game. And they go to a journeyman in Josh Johnson, he didn't have a chance, and
They knocked him out of the game as well.
yeah, and you can't win a football game that way. And yeah, so by the time they put Purdy back into the game, Purdy couldn't throw a football. He had to hand it off every time. So, you know, are we going to penalize the Eagles because of that happened? No, you're not. But you do have to wonder. They're stepping up in class now. Obviously, here they're in terms of what their defense is facing. In terms of Patrick, and I'm a little concerned about the receiving core because I covered the Kansas City, Cincinnati AFC Championship game, and Mahomes lost all of his receivers. Valdez Scantling was really the only healthy kind of established receiver that was left on there, and he had a fabulous game: 6 catches, 119 yards, I think, 116 yards. And but Juju Smith was scuffling a little bit. Kadarius went out with an ankle. Mecole Hardman is not even playing in this game. He's got a pelvis injury. He's out. So I am wondering, certainly listen, what's Patrick's ankle really like, and how are these receivers? Are they going to be healthy? It's been 2 weeks, so everybody should be a little bit better, or maybe quite a bit better. But I do think that it's something to watch, that Eagles defense, because I do think it's a pretty good defense.
Yeah.
But they have not been tested, and it's been a while. I mean, you're talking about with this 2 week break, and then you're talking a month and a half before the Eagles since the Eagles really have been tested.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun to watch that matchup, obviously. So my last question to you is what's your prediction? What do you see happening on Sunday? How's this game going to play out?
Well, full disclosure, Ryan, I have been firmly entrenched in last place in our post pick standings all year. I mean, I literally, it's been an embarrassing year for me. So, and as a past champion as well, I might toss in there. But so if anybody is going to listen to my prediction, I just want that out there, that I have not been right very often. But my premise on this game, honestly, and it's kind of a way I almost always go, I look at who's the best quarterback, who's got the best quarterback. And I think Mahomes is the best player on the football field, on either side of the ball, offense, defense. So I also picked against Mahomes in the AFC Championship game because I thought Cincinnati was the more complete team, better defense, better running game. I had just seen what Cincinnati had done to Buffalo. I covered that game, in the divisional round, and they shoved Buffalo around up in Buffalo in a snowstorm. So I really thought that was going to be a problem for the Chiefs. And, quite frankly, the Chiefs, gutted that game out with injuries, Mahomes' injury, the receivers' injuries, et cetera. Defense played way better than I thought they would, really shut down Burrow. So I kind of learned out of that Kansas City Cincinnati game not to bet against Patrick Mahomes. So I am not going to bet against Patrick Mahomes, and I'm going to pick the Chiefs to win this game.
Well, you heard it there. Mark's picking the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, and I don't blame you. It's tough to pick against Mahomes. I mean, he's just so special to watch, and it's going to be a really fun game, I think, this Sunday. Mark, thank you so much, man, for putting all this in perspective, and enjoy the game, man.
Anytime, Ryan. Thanks. Good talking to you.